was in my early 20s, I worked graveyard at a 24-hour Walmart. I worked in the toy department in the back of the store. I mainly worked alone, and once in a while a friend would help me stock, but unless we were heavy on freight, you basically did your thing and went home at 7 a.m. The first time I encountered the man we finally ended up calling Rat Man was around midsummer, 2 years into my job at this store. He would come in around 5 a.m. and look at all the Hot Wheels cars. He was a collector. There seems to be this group of men in their 50s and 60s who enjoy grabbing up these cars. I normally was in the back tossing my trash and boxes when he would venture in, never really speaking or seeing me, but I would see him come and go. One morning, I happened to be down that aisle when he came for his little 97-cent treasures. He got about 2 inches from my face and introduced himself. I seriously could not tell you what his name was, but he was 5 foot tall, overweight, and in his, I would guess, late 50s. His breath was something that can only be described as rancid rotting garbage mixed with onions or something. He literally had the worst breath, and he would get really close to your face. Our first encounter was just your average creeper feeling you get from someone. Maybe that dude at the bar you don't want hitting on you kind of feeling. I honestly thought nothing of it until he started showing up earlier to try and catch me on the sales floor. He would come up behind me and startle me, try to put his hand on my shoulder or grab a box I was stocking and offer to hold it, in front of his crotch mind you, while I got the items out. I was very young and stupid back then. I didn't know how to handle creeper men, and honestly, I'd only been hit on by a few guys before this that were creepy, to which I would never see them again. I just figured he was a creeper, until one morning he came up to me and asked me out. Oh boy, here it goes. I have to try and blow this guy off and hope he goes away. He came up to me and said, I noticed that you like to eat at Chinese buffets. You were there yesterday with your friend. I want to take you there. You seem to like the fresh fruit and the stir-fry noodles. What the fuck? I never saw this guy at the place, but my friend and I were there for lunch the day before he came in. Was he watching and I just didn't see him? He must have been, and watched what I ate. The place was pretty empty that day as well. My friend and I always went after the lunch groups as she had anxiety and didn't like to eat in really busy places. I just froze and told him no thanks, I'm very busy. I was worried for a bit, but he ended up just leaving me alone for that morning. The next day, I didn't see him in the store, and then I was off for 2 days. That Friday, when I returned to work, sure enough, he was there at 5 a.m. looking through the Hot Wheels. I was running behind him and still had boxes to stock. He kept staring at me, so I ended up calling my friend on the intercom phone and asked for her help. She knew what was going on with this guy, so she came over and stalked down the aisle that he was in. I continued working and thought that he had left, so I pushed my cart back to the stockroom, and just as I was about to turn the corner, he came from around the door and grabbed my arm. I twisted back and told him not to touch me, that he scared me. He said he was sorry and was just looking for me. He wanted to know if I'm always off on Wednesday and Thursday, as he came in and I wasn't here. I lied and told him that my days changed often. He then says to me that he didn't think that that was right because every Thursday afternoon I go to H-E-B, a grocery store, with an older woman in a green car. This guy was stalking me. I did go to the store with my mum on Thursday afternoons. I broke away from this guy and the conversation. The next day he came in again, walked right up to me and asked me out to lunch. I told him no, I was too busy, not wanting to date, and walked off. There had been a few small conversations early on with him and my friend about how he liked young girls to dance close to him. In general, he was creepy and we thought pervert. My friend gave him the nickname Ratman. One morning after work around 10 a.m, I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang. This was long before everyone had a cell phone. I was about to cover up and drift off, but I ended up getting out of bed and answering the phone. The voice on the other end of the line shook me to my core. It was Ratman. "Hi Sally, I hope I didn't wake you. I want to know if you go to the movies with me tonight." I yelled at him. "How the hell did you get my number?" He ends up telling me that my friend gave it to him and that she said I was secretly interested in him and too shy to tell him. I know that my friend wouldn't do this. I hung up on him, and the next night I asked my friend. She was upset and said no, that she would never do that. At the time, my boss was sitting with us at the lunch table. He overheard our conversation and asked what was going on. Eventually, I come to find out that my boss got a phone call in the store at 9 a.m. yesterday, asking for verification for employment and asked if they had my current number on file. This was long before any security measures were put in place where you can't just call and ask if so-and-so works there. So my boss thought that I had applied for a new job and gave this idiot my number. This Ratman continued to call and harass me. The next day on my 2 days off, he called at least 30 times and left messages for me on my answering machine, even crying and screaming, asking why I didn't love him, and then calling back and leaving a message about our trip that we were going to take together to Mexico, and how he couldn't wait to see me in my new swimsuit he bought me. The guy was mental. There were a few times after that where I would be at the store or in a mall and would look over and see him across the food court or in the same store I was shopping in, just watching. I ended up calling the police, which did no good, and changed my number. He finally stopped coming into the store. My boss said that he would escort him out if he did come in, but my boss got a transfer out of state, so this guy would pop in every once in a while. I changed apartments and stopped stocking toys. I have long moved away and still keep in touch with the one friend I met at Walmart. Up until 5 years ago, he was still coming into the store, she says, just older, but still creepy, and had started harassing another young girl who worked there. Number 5. This happened to me about 3 years ago. It was the first day of 9th grade and I was heading out my front door. My grandpa owned a very large van that sort of resembled an ice cream truck. The van pretty much completely blocked my view of the left side of our driveway. As I was walking closer to my grandma's car, she was still locking up the house. I could hear very faint humming. I didn't recognize the song then, but now I know it to be A Piece of My Heart by Janis Joplin. I ran to the side of the van to see a woman with horribly unkempt, frizzy, dark brown hair. She was caressing the van in an almost sexual way. At first, I didn't think she had seen me, but before I could turn to get help, she began to speak to me without turning to look at me. It wasn't weird for us to have people offer to buy the van, as it was pretty cool. However, I knew that Janis Joplin was long dead. I'm pretty creeped out at this point, so I turned to look for my grandma, who was gone back into the house for whatever reason. I assumed she had forgotten her cigarettes like she always did. When I look back to face this woman, she has already taken the liberty of getting completely in my face. So close that I could smell her breath, which smelled earthy like she had eaten soil. This woman looked really unhealthy. This was when I noticed what she was wearing. She had a white nightgown on, like the ones in hospitals, and was covering a dog tag in her hand that was around her neck. Her eyes were so pale blue, I thought it was possible that she might be blind. Being a 14-year-old girl who was scared of everything, I completely lost all sense of reason and tried to book it back into my yard. I felt this woman's cold, clammy hand clenching my wrist so tightly that I winced in pain. "Do you like to rock and roll, little lady?" she whispered into my ear. This was absolutely the final straw for me. I screamed for my grandparents to come outside, and before I knew it, my grandpa come stomping outside, threatening to call the police, saying that he was armed. Unfortunately, this wasn't the last that I saw of Janis Joplin. After finishing school that day, I sat in my living room watching TV and doing homework. I'm home alone for the next couple of hours, and that was pretty normal for me. A few days prior, my household had a yard sale, so our stuff was all tarped up on tables in our backyard. We always put our stuff away this way, especially when we plan on reopening soon. We never had any issues with it. I start hearing the tarp move and then some glass clinking together. I peek out our bathroom window, which overlooks the yard, to see the infamous Janis Joplin lady laying our things out on the grass. I was scared, but I felt safer being inside my house, so I yelled at her to stop, or I'm going to call the police. This didn't scare her. She ran up to the window and started screaming curses at me. She resembled a rabid animal. I ran to the kitchen where the phone is, start to dial 911, but the phone rings. I answer it, and it's a family friend of ours. He asks if I'm okay and that he called the police because he saw the woman in the yard when he drove by. I thank him, and he says he'll circle around and come back so that he can help me talk to the police. It turns out that the woman had broken out of a mental ward that was just a few blocks from my house. The tag she was messing with was her ID. When the police arrested her, she was trying to cut them with one of our plates that she had broken. She kept saying that I assaulted her, and that she was going to cut my private parts up. Number 4. Back in 2006, I was a sophomore in high school and was kind of the popular outcast. I had lots of friends, but never really fit in with any cliques in particular. So I tried to surround myself with people who were in similar situations as me. The beginning of that year brought in many new students, but one stood out to me and I knew that we just had to be friends. I won't be using real names here, so let's call him Derek. Derek was tall and quite bulky, but in a somewhat muscular way. He wasn't built per se, but he definitely had some muscle tone. He was one of the bad boy types. He and his mum were seated in front of my best friend Anne and I during our orientation, and we couldn't help but notice his short mohawk type of hairstyle and his many tattoos, which was kind of out of the ordinary for my rich kid stuck up high school. So naturally, we had to befriend him. He quickly became the bad boy that every girl in the school wanted, and he even grabbed the attention of some of the older girls in the school. One such girl in particular really had her eye on him, we'll call her Ashley. She was a year older than us and a pretty popular girl. She was kind of the stoner loner type of girl, but one that at the same time had tons of friends and always had at least one guy by her side. Derek definitely had his eye on her too, but at the same time she had a boyfriend. Next thing we know, her and Derek had begun dating, and we were all pretty excited for them. Well, everyone aside from Jason, that was. He didn't like Derek to begin with, but when he stole Ashley from him, something in Jason snapped. He was a taller, lanky guy, didn't have much muscle tone to him at all, and was pretty skinny if I remember correctly. Shortly after Derek and Ashley started dating, rumors about both of them began spreading like wildfire. There were rumors of her being raped and pregnant by Derek, and many rumors about Derek's past, all of which we knew to be lies, but the majority of kids in the school didn't think to do the research on it and just blindly believed everything that they were told. Things got hard for Derek as people were constantly harassing him and trying to start fights with him. This was around the middle of the year, and up until this point, Derek had never gotten into an argument with anyone, let alone any type of physical altercation. But everything came to a crashing point one day. Derek came to school pissed beyond anything we had ever seen. We asked him what was wrong, and he told us that Jason wouldn't leave Ashley alone, and that he had called her over and over again during the weekend, and Derek had had enough. We tried to calm him down and keep him from trying to fight with Jason, but nothing we did helped. As soon as Derek saw Jason step off of the school bus, he walked up to him and punched him one time in the face as hard as he could. Jason dropped to the ground with blood pouring out of his nose and mouth, and from what the principal told us, on the way to the hospital, he went into convulsions and had blood coming out from his ears. Fast forward about a week and Jason returns to school. Derek was in a detention school and would be there for a month before he could return to school. In the meantime, Ann and I stayed as far away from Jason as we could, and he did the same with us. On the day that Derek was supposed to come back to our high school, he was really sick and stayed home. That day is burned into my brain, and no matter how hard I try, I can't forget it. It was right after lunch when they locked the school down. No one was allowed to leave their classrooms, and no one had any idea why. We were on lockdown for an hour and a half, but let me tell you, it felt like 4 hours to me. Ann and I were in the same classroom, and I remember we were goofing off during the lockdown, thinking that one of our stoner friends had gotten caught with weed on them, or something like that. At the end of the lockdown, our SRO, School Resource Officer, came to our classroom and asked that Ann and I follow him to the office. When we got there, the principal informed us that Jason had been arrested. He had brought a loaded .45 and multiple knives with him to school. The principal had been alerted when another student saw the handle of the gun poking out of the back of Jason's pants when he had bent over to get his backpack. And, as if that wasn't horrifying enough, he took out a piece of paper and laid it down in front of us. Jason had written out a hit list. This kid was a junior in high school, and he had a hit list. I remember looking down at the list and reading 1. Derek, 2. Ann, and 3. Me. I remember just breaking down and crying. While we were laughing and goofing off, there was a guy on a mission to kill us. When he was arrested, he was outside of the girls' bathroom near the lunchroom, the same place Ann and I went every day. He had first lunch and we had third lunch, which were were about an hour and a half or so away from each other. The school went on lockdown and he was apprehended shortly after his lunch, right before second lunch began. I don't know if he would have actually carried out his plan or if he would have chickened out, but I do know that if he would have carried it out, I may not be here today. It's not something that I think about every day now, but when I do think about it, I feel that same panic I felt when the list was laid down in front of me. Number 3. It happened in my bedroom at the age of 10. I always had trouble sleeping and spent most of my nights tossing and turning. I was a horror film fanatic as a child, and being scared was something that I didn't have much experience with. I was not afraid of the dark, nor was I easily swayed by strange sounds or odd encounters. I did, however, know when to haul ass out of a situation or to find a trusted adult. I always slept with my closet doors open, which will come to be of some significance later in the story. I should also mention that my family home was in a heavily wooded area, in what some may refer to as the middle of nowhere. One night, around 1 a.m., I woke up to a sound coming from underneath my bed. It sounded like one of my cats was scratching themselves with one of their feet, or doing something to cause a thumping beneath me. I had heard this same sound many times before, and its source had always been one of my fuzzy friends. So this time, I didn't look. I closed my eyes and tried to resume my slumber. I turned over onto my left side, which left me facing the wall against which my bed was pressed up to. I heard the sound again, and thinking that my kitty was directly beneath me, I said, "Good night," and I was able to fall asleep once again. The next time I awoke, it was to a surreal and shocking scene. The sheet and comforter of my bed were no longer covering me. I saw a man standing over my bed, poking me, fucking poking me with his finger, and the way in which he did so was truly horrifying. It was not the way that a child would poke a friend in jest. It was as if he was touching another human being for the first time, exploring the sensation of the tip of his index finger jabbing at the flesh. What I saw was so unbelievable, so impossibly strange that I believed that I was dreaming. I tried desperately to wake from my nightmare, but to no avail. The poking continued. He poked at my chest, my belly, my legs, and my arms. Paralyzed and scared shitless, I yelled, "Wake up!" And with this, the man threw himself to the floor and closed his eyes, as if he was trying to lead me to believe that he was asleep or dead. I have no fucking idea. It was at this time I realized I could not have been dreaming. I somehow found the ability to move, and I jumped from the top of my bed over the man lying on the floor next to me and ran towards my parents' room. When I got to their bedroom door, something came over me. I told myself that this was all impossible, that there was no way that a person could have entered our home without breaking in, as we had always kept every door and window locked at night. I had seen many strange things in my home whilst either falling asleep or waking up. By the third or fourth time, after speaking to my mum or dad about it, I knew that it was my mind playing tricks on me. Do not ask why, dear listener, as I have no explanation to offer you. But I turned away from my parents' bedroom door and decided to hastily check the house for a break-in. What I found was that nothing was out of the ordinary. No broken windows or locks, no busted doors, nothing. I assured myself that I had to have been dreaming or hallucinating, and blamed my obsession with horror for this. I made my way down the long, dark and narrow hallway to my bedroom. I peeked inside and saw no one. I turned on the light, got down on the floor just outside the doorway and looked under the bed. Nothing. I proceeded to check both of my windows for signs of a break-in, which were not present. Both windows were closed and locked. I knew it. I was totally seeing things. I crawled back into bed and decided to watch some TV in order to calm myself down and distract from my thoughts of the scary as hell dream or hallucination I just had. I turned on the TV, flipped to a channel with a seemingly boring program, and put the remote control on my bedside table. I was lying on my right side, facing away from the wall that I mentioned previously. As I laid there, my eyes began to adjust to the dark room with the faint light from the TV screen. Just beyond the TV, I saw something that made my heart sink into the pit of my stomach. Inside my closet, with one of the doors now slightly closed, I saw the man standing perfectly still, facing the wall, hiding, waiting for me to fall asleep, I imagine. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I sat and stared at the man in my closet for what seemed like minutes, but was most likely only a few seconds. I quietly got out of bed, hoping that the man wouldn't notice, and that my dad could catch him hiding in the closet. I once again made my way to my parents' bedroom door, still remaining as quiet as I possibly could, and went inside. I shook my dad and my mum at the same time, and when they awoke, I said, "Shh, don't make any sound. There's someone in my closet." My parents both jumped up and said, "What?" I repeated myself and asked them to please call 911. My mum immediately picked up the phone. Neither of my parents had doubted my claim, as I had always been honest and forthright. They both knew that there was no way that I was making this up or that I was mistaken. I'm sure that the look that I had on my face made it clear that this was really happening. My dad told my mum and I that he was going to go and take a look and urged us to stay in their bedroom and lock the door. So we did. At this point, I was beyond scared. I didn't know what the man was capable of, whether he had a weapon or whether my dad was safe. I just stood in my room with my mum and cried. After what felt like hours, my dad knocked on the door and told me that it was him, and that it was okay to open the door. My mum unlocked the door and let my dad inside. I said something to the effect of, "Did you get him?" And my dad looked at me with the most unsettling and confused look imaginable. He said, "There's no one there." I assured him that there was indeed a man in my room and that he had been poking me. My dad said that he had checked every inch of the house and found no one. He had also checked the doors and windows, just as I had done. But then it hit me. He must have had a key. As soon as I said this, my parents looked at each other in absolute terror. Our nearest neighbor, a trusted and beloved friend whom we considered family, was in possession of a key to our house, as she had regularly babysat me since I was a toddler. She was the only person outside of my immediate family with a key to our home. Soon after this revelation, the police arrived, took statements, checked around our property, and left. None of us got any sleep that night. The next day, my dad went to my neighbor's house and asked if she knew where her key to our house was. She said yes, and when she went to show him, she saw that it was missing. Her home had no signs of break-in, and but she had always kept her doors and windows locked too. My parents had all of the locks on our doors changed and opted to never again give a key to anyone, except in the wake of an emergency. I never discovered the identity of the man that lurked in my bedroom that night. The event left me traumatized, and it took a very long time for me to accept what had happened and move on. My sleeping trouble turned into full-on insomnia, and for about a decade, I was unable to sleep without a light on. It's been about 20 years since that night, and apart from my parents, I have never told a soul about it until now. My heart goes out to anyone who has suffered a trauma in their lives, and I hope that you are all able to find peace with yourselves. Number 2. I'm a 32-year-old female and I live with my mother in a very rural area. My house is surrounded on all sides by miles of thick forest, with our driveway as the only open area leading out to the main road. Our closest neighbours on both sides are family members, and you can't see our house from the road, so I've never really felt the need to keep the doors closed or even get fully dressed before walking outside. No pants runs out to the storage shed are common, and I usually think nothing of leaving both the front and back doors open. During the day, it just feels really safe, but this has changed recently. It gets really hot in my part of the country. Over 100 degrees Fahrenheit isn't uncommon in the summer. We recently got a pool in the backyard. Unfortunately, I've been taking medicine which causes my skin to blister if I get in direct sunlight, and the pool sits right where the sun hits it from sunrise until about 3 hours before sunset. That was my time to swim. For the first couple of days, I didn't feel anything but bliss as I swam, and I would be in there until well after dark. About 3 days in, I started feeling a little nervous about staying in the pool after my mother got out, or about going in without her. She usually went in with me because I'd been sick and she was afraid with all of the medication I was taking that I might pass out and drown. There was no logical reason why I felt uneasy though. It was my own backyard and no one can see me behind the house. Not to mention that I have 2 yappy dogs who bark when they so much as think that there might be a stranger around. The last time I felt so unnerved, I'd been walking in the woods behind the house and realized that I was being stalked by a mountain lion. It was my danger sense telling me that something just wasn't right, but I kept rationalizing it away. A week goes by and I stop staying out after dark. By the time the sun goes down, I'm always inside. So here's where it finally dawned on me that a person's danger sense is called that for a reason. It had only been about 20 minutes since my mother got out, and I had done a couple of laps back and forth, but was tiring kind of early. So I stopped swimming and just kind of bobbed in the water with my head tilted back, looking at the fluffy white clouds in a clear blue sky. It was really peaceful and relaxing. Had I been floating with my ears underwater, I probably wouldn't have heard it. A soft crackling sound, like dry leaves being crunched underfoot. I shot upright and looked around, but saw nothing. I figured it was the dogs, so I swam to the side of the pool where I thought it was coming from, pulled myself up and looked over the edge, with a smile on my face and the dog's names on my lips. But there was nothing there. Confused, I swam around the entire pool, looking over the edge for the dogs, but nothing. I'd mostly convinced myself that it was a squirrel and was relaxing back into the water when I heard it again. The soft crunching of leaves, followed by the snapping of a twig. It was coming from the tree line. Again, I called for the dogs since they love running into the woods, but there was complete silence. I ducked back into the water beneath the edge of the pool and waited. Less than a minute later, I heard it again, very clearly from the trees directly across from me. I perked my head up and stared intently in that direction. The sounds stopped. I continued staring. Unfortunately, I'm nearsighted and obviously didn't bring my glasses into the pool. All I could see was the blurry green and brown from the trees. I ducked back down and did a lap, then paused next to the ladder. This is the point at which I noped out of there as fast as my waterlogged body could go. Up the ladder, grabbed the towel and shoes, and into the house. I told my mother what I heard, but much like me, she assumed it was the dogs because they were outside at the time. I told her it couldn't be. 2 young Jack Russell Terriers couldn't make soft, slow-walking sounds if their lives depended on it, and they definitely would have come running when I called them. My thought was that it was a mountain lion prowling about, and that I shouldn't go back out for the rest of the day to give it time to clear off. I hopped in the shower to wash off the chlorine and had pretty much put it out of mind, when I realized something terrifying. The footsteps were actually familiar, but I didn't place where I'd heard them until that moment. They weren't the steps of a 4-legged animal. These were more like something that I'd make when I used to go hiking back there. Those were human footsteps. I finished my shower as calmly as possible and then told my mother my deduction, but she still didn't believe me. Later, my cousin brought my dogs home. Turns out they'd been playing with his dogs in his yard for most of the day. Definitely not in the woods. 2 days later, we had some terrible storms roll through. Very little rain, but wind that took down trees and thunder that shook the house. From the first boom, I was wide awake, laying in my bed and hoping it would be over soon. After about an hour, the power went out. Without electricity and all the background noise that no one ever thinks about, it was eerily silent, except for the constant loud rumbles and booms of thunder. Finally, not able to get back to sleep, I got up to find a lantern and visit the bathroom. I took one step out of my room and froze. The rumbling I'd heard wasn't just thunder. Someone was standing on the back stairs and pulling at the back door. The door may look like a standard wooden exterior door, but it's actually steel. The rumbling was the metal door, rattling in its metal frame, sounding much like the rumbles of thunder. The layout of the house is basically my bedroom on the very end, the bathroom just next to my bedroom, then the back door in the hall leading to the kitchen. I was literally feet away from whoever desperately wanted to get into my house. I stood frozen in place, my body gone cold and shaking. After a few more minutes of rattling, it stopped and I heard what sounded like angry footsteps go down the stairs and head not towards the road, but into the woods. I went back to bed and hid under the covers like a scared little kid until morning. You might ask, why didn't you wake your mother? Why didn't the dogs bark? Why didn't you call the cops? Well, the power was out and I knew the cell phone wasn't charged, so calling the cops was out. My mother couldn't have done anything and has a bad track record with not listening to me about dangerous situations. So frankly, I didn't trust her to not cause an even worse situation by going outside to prove to me that no one was there. As for the dogs, they are scared of nothing except thunder. They were hiding under the couch where they always go when it's raining. For nearly 2 weeks, nothing else happened. I didn't go back into the pool and I made sure the doors were locked at night, but everything just basically went back to normal. One day, I had just gotten up and headed for the shower. Both front and back doors were open, but my mother was sitting in the living room with both dogs. I did not feel the least bit unsafe taking a shower with the bathroom door closed but unlocked. About halfway through the shower, I hear a loud thump from inside the room. My first thought was that it was the towels and they had fallen off the counter. I pulled back the curtain to check, but they were right where I'd put them. Then I noticed that the bathroom door was cracked open. Someone had opened the door, only to hit the trash can I'd placed over the floor vent right in front of the door. I assumed it was my mother and went back to my shower. If she really needed in, she'd just have to push the can out of the way. When I got out, I headed to the living room to find neither my mother nor the dogs anywhere inside. Alright, maybe she'd opened the door to tell me that she was going somewhere and I just hadn't heard her. About that time, she walked in with the dogs and mail in hand. I asked what she wanted and she told me that she'd left just after I got in the shower. She walked down to the mailbox and the dogs had followed her. I really didn't want to scare her or be disbelieved again, so I told her that I thought I'd heard her say something and left it at that. But it was definitely not her that opened the door. I figured whoever it was, they were trying to be sneaky and thought I'd been alerted to an intruder when they caused the noise, so they fled. That was 3 days ago. I have still not called the police because I have absolutely no proof. No one has experienced anything but me, and even though I'm most certainly not an overdramatic, attention-seeking liar, I've been painted as one in the past due to certain mental and anxiety issues. Even if I contacted the police, I'm sure I'd just get the "there's nothing we can do" treatment. As for the footsteps in the woods, I have pretty much decided that this person does not know that my eyesight is as bad as it is. The footsteps stopped when I stared in their direction because they thought I'd seen them. When I ducked back down, they decided I hadn't, and probably thought that I was floating with my ears submerged and couldn't hear clearly. Update. This evening my aunt called the police and someone was taken away by them. I wasn't there at the time, so I don't know what it was about, but she lives right next door to me. It's too late now, but I'll ask her what happened tomorrow and let everyone know what I found out. Update. Okay, here's what I know. My aunt came home from work and found the gate to the road that leads back into the woods open, with the lock broken. The road is on her land, but mostly used by a quarry that's on the other side of the woods. She started down the road to investigate when she heard several gunshots from the woods. Being the smart lady she is, she called the police. When they arrived, they found a man in his late teens or early 20s in the quarry. He had shot up the supervisor's trailer and loaded several pieces of equipment onto his ATV. He was arrested, and the supervisor told my aunt that they had dealt with him before. He'd been underage the first couple of times he'd caused problems, and they'd gotten their stolen items back, so they had let it go. This time they're not going to, and he's definitely going to jail. Apparently, he'd also been stealing out of my aunt's storage, destroying the fences around the property line, and generally just being a nuisance. I think that if this is the man who was in my house, he may have come in to rob us and not realize that I was still inside. Thinking back, I don't know for sure that he ever saw my mother and I together. He may have thought that only one woman lived here, my mother left to get the mail, he thought that the house was empty. Hearing the shower running may have confused him, so he opened the door to check instead of immediately heading for what he wanted to steal. He's been wandering around on our property, stealing and causing trouble for at least 3 years without us ever knowing it. I think he just got overconfident and careless and finally got caught. I am really hoping that this is the case, and there isn't another creeper hanging around in the middle of nowhere looking to do more than just steal things. The only thing left unexplained is, what was he doing that night during the storm, pulling on our back door? Was he testing to see if he could get in? It was the middle of the night and both vehicles were in the front yard. He had to know that we were home. If anything else happens, I'll update again, but I'm going to say that this is the end of it. I hope. Number 1. My city is a very historic naval city. I won't say where to maintain some sort of anonymity to protect the individuals involved, which ultimately includes me. As a result of the city's long and vibrant history, there are certain parts of that history that became abandoned and left derelict. This makes my city a goldmine for urban explorers. There are various abandoned buildings all over the city. When my two friends, and I'll refer to them as A and B, and my name in this story is C, were just taking a walk along the seafront one day to meet some other friends to have a barbecue on the beach. We walked past what we thought was an active naval base. From far away, the buildings looked intact and like they were still maintained. Radars were still positioned at the top, windows from our angle were not smashed, and the place just looked generally like it was uninhabited. However, what caused us to double take was the lack of naval or security personnel. Surely a base as well kept as this would have guards at the front gate and personnel walking around doing their duties. But no, from our angle, the place was devoid of human life. This made us take a quick detour to investigate a bit further and walk around the seafront to get a more detailed picture. To provide some sort of blueprint, the base was actually made up of a number of buildings set along the seafront. There were several small buildings and 2 large main buildings. The 2 large main buildings and most of the smaller buildings were grouped together, with 2 of the small buildings grouped together at the other end of the compound. The distance between the groups must have been about a half a mile. All along the compound though, you could clearly see the foundations for what were buildings that had obviously been demolished. To the north of the compound, you could see a slope down which would eventually lead to a lack of barbed wire gate to another base, which was still fully functioning as we could see spinning radars and security personnel. The main access gate to the abandoned compound was via a gravel road which connected to the housing estate to the northwest of the compound. We were walking through this estate to access the walkway to the west of the compound, to access the seafront which went along the south of the compound and curved around to the east of the compound. Once we had taken a quick walk along the south of the compound, we definitely confirmed to ourselves that the place was empty, and, judging by loose cables dangling from inactive CCTV cameras and smashed windows on the seafront side, our suspicions were confirmed. The place was abandoned. Our urban exploration urges went into overdrive, but we had to quickly stifle this feeling as we would not be able to immediately gain entry and explore due to it being daylight, a large number of people around, having no equipment and being generally unprepared. So, we decided that we would return later on in the night. Nighttime falls, and as we are making our way to the compound, we are feeling a massive sense of anxiousness and excitement. This was probably easily our biggest urban exploration yet, which made it both an outstanding achievement to accomplish, but also a logistical challenge. While it is a new set of buildings to explore, we had no idea, firstly, of potential entry and exit points into the compound, and indeed, the buildings themselves. We also had no idea if other explorers would have taken an interest, and of course, if there are any people who have taken up half-permanent residency inside the buildings. Hell, if I was homeless and desperate for a roof over my head, I wouldn't think twice. None of us mentioned anything of the paranormal aspect. None of our concerns would stop us though, and we'd like to think through various situations of the past. We'd be prepared for any situation that may arise. As we approached the compound, we were instantly hypnotized by its looming darkness. While it looked intact and somewhat inviting during the day, at night it was the complete polar opposite. For a densely packed city with many lights and a problem with light pollution, all the elements combined that night to provide us with the ultimate spook feeling. Cloudless, quiet, isolated, and not a light in sight. I could barely see my hand in front of my face, and we hadn't even gone inside yet. To avoid being seen by a muggle at this very early stage, we opted to keep our torches off and only use our smartphone displays to scan along the perimeter of the compound fence to find an entry and exit point. Our search took us nearly to the middle of the south and southeastern edge of the compound, near to where the seafront gives way to the harbour on the east side of the compound. While this entry and exit point was ideal in one aspect, it wasn't anywhere near the public walkway. It was also on a downside, which meant that it was further to walk to the first main grouping of the compound buildings. The entry and exit point was also a tight one, so it'd take some effort to get into the site. As I was the smallest build of the trio, but the most fearless and agile, I opted to go through the fence first to test it and see if the other side was safe to land on. Other than getting my jacket caught on the first attempt, my entry was relatively smooth. I didn't get stuck and there was a solid bit of concrete about a foot underneath to drop onto. After giving the all clear to the other two, they began to plan to get each other in, with A the next to attempt entry. A was the tallest of the trio, and while of an average build, is the strongest, and was able to pull the fence open that little bit more to guarantee his safe entry into the compound. While he was the same height as me, he was a stocky build and initially got stuck. Last of all was B. While he was the same height as me, he was of a stocky build and initially got stuck. He said his jacket got caught and required A and I to help him to get in. As he entered, we watched as our entry point slowly bent back into the shape of the fence, making it look like it hadn't been tampered with. As it was so convincing, we decided to stick some reflective tape on the wall to indicate where our future exit point is. That's right, this time we came prepared, or so we thought. So far, the start of our exploration has been event-free, which was how we'd like to keep it. As our entry point had put us closer to the small cluster of small buildings half a mile away from the main buildings, we decided to explore those first. From what we could see as we walked closer, there was no clear-cut entry point into the buildings, as there was cardboard covering what looked like the main entrance, so we decided to just walk around. The buildings were actually built in a sort of L shape, with one rectangular building connected to the smaller square-shaped building. All of the windows on these buildings were basically non-existent and were just pitch-black gaping holes into the abyss. However, we identified a man-sized window on the ground floor of the square-shaped building which had no pointy glass as our entry and exit point. It was big enough for all three of us to comfortably climb through, which was ideal in a worst-case chase scenario. Not that we were expecting to be chased, mind you. Now we were inside, we felt safe to turn on our torches. The window we climbed into turned out to be a small corridor which, on the left, led to some smashed up toilets, and on the right, a door into another room. Going past the door, we were now into the main room of what we believed was the rectangular-shaped building. There wasn't actually much to this room, apart from the boarded-up entrance opposite the door from which we entered. Another boarded-up door to the left and to the right, which acquired our attention the most, and a creepy-looking metal ladder heading up to another floor which was even darker than the one that we were currently on. Before we proceeded any further, we all whispered how we felt so far and all agreed on a general consensus of shitting ourselves because of how dark and quiet things were. We decided to turn off our lights, stay quiet and just listen to see if there was any movement in the building. But there was just deafening silence. By the sound of things, we were completely alone, but I did not feel satisfied by the lack of noise and decided to engage anyone who may be inside. I reluctantly shouted to see if anyone was in the building, kind of hoping there would be movement, but at the same time kind of hoping there wouldn't. The deafening silence persisted, but now I felt a bit more comfortable to proceed. We all walked cautiously over to the metal staircase and peered upwards at the darkness, with A having the initiative to turn on his torch and point up. The torch barely illuminated the roof of the upper floor due to the intense darkness and thick mold covering the ceiling, which, to our disgust, was dripping some viscous liquid onto the floor below. More quickly than I would have liked, A suddenly shone his torch over at B and I, making us both jump. He quietly explained how he has a growing bad feeling about the exploration and had a nagging voice in the back of his head to leave. This surprised me a little, as usually A is pretty fearless, puts on a brave face and rarely expresses when he's feeling anxious when not coming to a group consensus. But I put this down to our current environment, as I was feeling like I was being drowned in darkness, which, while wasn't a new sensation, was not one I particularly enjoyed or experienced that often. As B is generally the straight talker and sense maker in the trio, B explained to A how we always feel like that when we visit new places, but we will be fine as we were well prepared for most things that could happen. This seemed to satisfy A, who then proceeded to climb up the ladder first, his torch clipped onto his overalls, pointing up, illuminating his face as well as the ceiling above. His face looked different, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I had no time to think, however, as I was the next one up the ladder to the upper floor, followed by B. When we all made it up the ladder, we shone our flashlights forward and was greeted by another corridor, narrower than the one we entered, with 4 doors, 2 on each side. From our glance, the 2 rooms on the left were pitch black, and the 2 rooms on the right had a small amount of light from the city. While seeing some lights was somewhat reassuring, they did barely anything to push back the darkness that had been enveloping us as we entered the first room on the right to see what was inside. We all froze for a moment as we processed what we saw. In the middle of the room, facing the window, was a wooden chair, which, upon closer, reluctant inspection, looked quite new. We all chuckled quietly to ourselves when we realized how cliche it looked, but we were all, understandably, uneasy. Not much sooner after we had our little chuckle, we were all rooted to where we stood when we heard what sounded like a twig snapping from the dark room opposite. We all quickly jolted our bodies towards the gaping dark doorway, turning off our torches in the process, then not moving, waiting for something to appear. It felt like the earth stood still in that moment. Not a muscle twitched as the darkness seemed to just suck us all in, 10 times as intimidating as it was before. Everything was quiet once more as no one dared to move or speak. After what felt like an eternity of silence, I then slowly began to approach the dark room. For what was a 4-step distance, in reality, felt like an endless corridor in that moment as the even darker doorway loomed over me. I eventually made it to the frame of the door and listened intently. Nothing stirred. Many thoughts were currently running through my mind. If it's a person, they could literally be face to face with me right now, and I probably wouldn't see them. They could be in position, ready to pounce at me. Still, nothing stirred. I decided to be brave as I slowly brought my torch before me, hesitating to press the on button. I was afraid of what I was going to see when I turned the light on. I could back away right now, but curiosity keeps me locked in. It was settled. I closed my eyes as I heard the click of my flashlight. I wasn't dead, so I slowly opened my eyes to see what I had illuminated in the room ahead. I was then bemused by what I saw. Nothing. There was nothing in the room, nothing that could have caused the snapping sound anyway, as there was no twigs and nothing to snap the twig on. By this point, the others had come to see and were equally as bemused as me as to what caused the noise. Now, I was slightly more comfortable. I felt that we were a bit silly reacting to nothing. The noise just could have been something from outside. But just to be sure, I started to walk into the dark room to check behind the door, but not before. I feel my heart skip 8 beats as in a split second I see something appear in front of me, smash into my face and quickly disappear behind me. I felt my legs give way as I sat down against the wall, curled up in shock of what just happened. Everything seemed to happen so fast, yet it seemed to take an age as I regained full mental capacity and started processing what just happened. I could make out B was talking to me, but both sound and vision were a blur to start with, before slowly transitioning into English. "Fucking pigeon," B exclaimed quietly while helping me to my feet. Of all the things to scare the shit out of me and stun me into shock, a fucking pigeon. I laughed to myself as I came to clarity with my environment once more, and noticed something. "Where's A?" I asked B, who seemed startled by the fact that A had disappeared, as according to B, he had been present 5 seconds before. After B and I had searched all the upstairs rooms with no sign of A, we started growing increasingly concerned as we headed down the metal ladder to search the ground floor rooms. Still no sign of A. This begins to concern me as the A I have grown up to know would not disappear like this, even when we've been startled before. B and I pick up our pace and, having searched the ground floor, coordinated to jump back out the window we came in and go around the L-shaped building in the opposite directions. When we both bumped into each other again without A, our concern was now at alarm. A was nowhere to be found.